David Littleproud, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, do you honestly think terrorists might have slipped through the net and made it to Australia?
Well, what we're saying is that we believe, and Peter Dutton said this, that 99% of the people who bring in this country come with the right intent to participate in our society the way that we expect them and add to our society. We're in no way saying, in any way, shape or form, that we don't still welcome those of the Islamic faith to this country. We're just saying, in a reasonable suggestion by the opposition, that when you're looking at a war zone and the fluid nature of it, that why wouldn't you put in place the programs and the procedures that were put in place in the past to give Australians comfort and give those families, and particularly the bringing children here that want to have a safe existence, that we can promise them that, because we haven't brought someone in that doesn't have the hate that is permeating in some parts of the world to this country and utilises that to tear away at the very safety of our great country.
But fleeing a war zone can often be chaotic, it can be messy, there's not always... people fleeing Afghanistan didn't have the time for a face-to-face interview and so on. Do you accept here, we're talking about people that Israel approved to leave, Egypt then checked, Australia then checked against its movement alert list, some were even referred to ASIO. There's a few checks along the way.
Well, there is, but they haven't been consistent, and I think what we have proved that while we do rely on some of our partners to help us in some of the intelligence around individuals, it's important for ourselves to also do that around face-to-face interviews, and we showed great compassion, and Peter Dutton himself as an Immigration Minister, in making sure that we could bring those that had faced some of the greatest atrocities, being able to bring them to this country and make sure that they can enjoy a safe country that we do, because someone that doesn't have their intent didn't slip through the net. And I think all we've made is a simple suggestion, and for this, a desperate attempt of politicisation by the Prime Minister down to the Teals and the Greens of a suggestion that I don't think is unreasonable. In fact, what the government has done is unprecedented. Peter Dutton is simply going back and making a suggestion of one that we utilise. So
the suggestion is the face-to-face.
So
the suggestion is the face-to-face interview, right? Is that the one thing that's...
Well, we've made it clear that if the government, and there may be a juncture in the future where we can open up our borders again to those wanting to flee Gaza. At the moment, as you've quite rightly articulated, that can't happen. But why don't we put in place the policies and procedures now that would give us comfort, to make sure no one sneaks in, and that's just common sense. That's what was put out there by Peter Dutton. And
just in common sense, I mean, even after they've gone through all those checks, you think a face-to-face interview is where they might actually admit, yeah, I'm actually a terrorist?
Well, I think that is where you allow the experts to be able to interview and to be able to make those assessments. Not an immigration official, when most of these visas, those that are here now, were done on average in 24 hours, some in less than an hour. How can we have confidence that the right decisions and the criteria was hit, as Mike Burgess has said, and the Prime Minister failed to represent him properly in Parliament? How do we know that was done in any way, shape or form? And I think it's reasonable for the opposition to simply ask questions, to put reasonable solutions to make sure we get that comfort, and we're doing more. And we're saying we're prepared to bring them in. We're doing more than what some of Palestine's own neighbours, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, aren't prepared to take any refugees.
Egypt has more than 100,000 Palestinians stuck there at the moment, just to be clear.
Yeah, but there's other countries there that aren't doing as much as Australia, and I think we're still prepared to show that compassion, but we want to make sure that when they come here, they can continue to enjoy the lifestyle that we...
And a face-to-face interview would...
I think that
do the job that all those other checks can't.
With biometric testing and doing it in third country, and Peter Dutton made that very clear, that that's a sensible way that's worked previously for Australia to give those families that comfort when they come to Australia, that they'll enjoy the lifestyle they're expecting to come and enjoy.
And those who are here already, the 1,300 or so, I mean, how worried are you? Should they be put in detention? What should happen to them?
Well, I think there's an opportunity for the government to be able to demonstrate that we've done appropriate checks. Now, some of those people were brought in, as I said, with visas issued in less than an hour. So we need to make sure that there has been some process that we can get that comfort.
So you're not comfortable at the moment?
Well, they need to articulate that, not just to the opposition, they need to articulate that.
But from what you've heard so far, you're not...
Well, I haven't heard anything. I think this has been more about...
So you're worried about them?
Well, I think it's important, it's a responsibility of the government to articulate that. They'd be more interested in trying to paint Peter Dutton as heartless and racist rather than actually going to the core of their responsibility and giving Australians confidence that the people that we give the privilege to come to this country...
Do you accept the ASIO boss didn't seem too worried about them?
Well, again, if criteria is hit, he sees them. Now, if you're issuing visas in an hour or less than 24 hours, how do we know that the criteria to hit ASIO were met? And that's where
these people have been here months. You don't think ASIO's going to actually look at people they're worried about?
Well, again, that's what I'm saying is I think it's beholden on the government. It's their responsibility to give us all confidence.
And you don't have confidence in that at the moment?
No, that's not what I said at all. I'm saying the government needs to be, that's more than likely been done, but I think it's appropriate that the government gives that confidence to the Australian people and everybody else. That's in essence what Peter Dutton and the Coalition has basically said. We've put forward a reasonable suggestion, one that's been used in precedent before. Why would we deviate from that when it's proved to work? And that, I think, sadly, has seen the politics of this just escalate because they saw an opportunity to demonise Peter Dutton's character.
You don't think Peter Dutton was playing politics?
No, it was well, you tell me if that's not a reasonable suggestion to actually put forward a policy that has been utilised before, that has given Australians confidence and comfort about the people we bring to this country. That's our primary responsibility, to keep Australians safe.
Let's move on to some other issues. I want to focus a bit on regional Australia while we've got you here. We saw during the week some pretty concerning NAPLAN figures, particularly for the regions, and this is one of the really stark things you see in the NAPLAN results, this geographic divide. The further you get away from the big cities, the worse the results get for kids. One expert says the results in some remote areas are third world. What would the Nationals do to try and fix these problems?
We're just got to get back to basics. As I get around, even my own electorate, which covers outback Queensland, it's just basically decluttering much of the curriculum. I get feedback from teachers and principals that there's just too much in the curriculum for them to cover, and they're not doing the basics well enough because they don't have the time. I think we need to let the grassroots, which are the teachers out there on the ground, to be able to articulate what's going to work. My father was a teacher, and I can tell you, it's getting back to the basics and giving them the tools, not cluttering the curriculum up. I think the government, in terms of the funding models that they're looking at now and trying to get the states to agree that, it's important that we actually have outcomes tied to funding. And I think that's
back the extra funding.
Well, I think so long as there's caveats and outcomes tied to it. I think as federal governments of all persuasions, we're very quick to say we put big swathes of money into problems, but they're never tied the states to outcomes. And I think that's very important around our federation. As our federations change, I think the funding that comes from the federal government needs to come with serious outcomes, and I support the government if they're going to continue down that track, but I think we seriously need to look at the curriculum.
Regions often have a lot of skills shortages at the moment. Peter Dutton wants a big cut in the migration intake. What would that mean for the regions?
Well, we're going to say who should come to this country, the skills that they should have, and we're going to encourage them to go to those parts where we do have shortages. That's the tough decisions that a Dutton Littleproud government's prepared to make. In some parts of regional Australia, even in the Northern Territory, in Darwin, we've actually got population decline. We need more skills in there, but we're not going to bring in dog groomers and martial arts instructors. We're going to bring in the people we need and the skills we need. When you've got a housing crisis, you probably might want to bring in a few roofers and tilers and builders and electricians, but also go to some of those skills, particularly in regional Australia, where you can bond them. And what we found from experience when we were in government, if you bond them for 5 to 6 years, invariably they've made a connection with the community and they don't want to leave. And that's how you make sure that regional Australia grows. We have the tools we need by having the human capital we need. And I think that's the common sense decision that we're prepared to make.
And you don't want a reduction in international students at regional unis. Have you convinced Peter Dutton of that?
Well, Peter Dutton's made that very clear even in his budget reply speech, that regional universities be looked at differently. We need to understand they've got a different business model. So they
won't see a reduction?
Well, we're going to work with all the universities to make sure we get that right. But when you look at Sydney,
that mean? Well, there won't be a reduction?
Well, look at Sydney University, for example. I mean, 47% of their students are foreign. They made $1.4 billion from those last year. That's beyond the pale. Regional universities invariably don't have as many foreign students. There's a couple that do, one near me in Toowoomba, but we'll get that balance right, and regional universities will get the priority, is what we've been very clear, but we'll work with all. Before the election, that will be very clear and upfront to everybody, but we won't be bringing 1.67 million people.
On tax, I want to ask your plans here. When you first ran for Parliament, you were a big fan of the idea of zonal taxation. I saw Peter Dutton a couple of weeks ago opened the door to the coalition looking at something like this. What are you going to do here? Lower income taxes for people in the regions?
Yeah, well, look, I'm not going to announce the policy today, David. Obviously, you're a very popular show, but not popular enough for me to make an announcement. But look, we're working through a suite of measures. There's already a zonal tax rebate that's in place. It hasn't been touched since the 90s, and so the cost of living in regional areas is significantly greater because of the cost of transport, fuel, and so we want to make sure that we get that policy setting right.
Housing's a bit cheaper though.
It's all relative, but David, you understand the wages and the jobs that they earn aren't as high, and so you've got to understand one of the biggest constraints we also have is childcare accessibility. And I went to the Jobs and Skills Summit when I first became leader and made it very clear of the $4.7 billion they were giving to subsidies to those on $300,000 to $500,000 a year, cut a few dollars to get some more places out in regional Australia so families can go back to work.
Okay, but you will have some lower income taxes for people in the regions?
Oh, well, we'll be making our announcement as we work through a process, a very structured, methodical process to make sure we can say to the...
That's your ambition?
Well, look, the National Party, I mean, obviously we've been very proactive this term in making sure that many of the policy settings that are very important to Nationals, that we've led on that, but we're doing that in a responsible way in making sure that we can still pay the bills for all Australians.
And you mentioned high income earners. Would you really want another tax cut for the highest income earners in Australia?
Well, it's important for us to remember that we gave the first two-stage tax cuts to lower middle income earners. The third one was about tax reform. It was about recalibrating and thinking about the future. Thinking about those that are at university today, they're going to get caught with higher taxes into the future because of bracket creep. And I think we're going to have to tackle it at some point, David. Otherwise, we're going to have a tax system that doesn't reward effort, and in fact, inflation is going to catch up to it. So why wouldn't we have the courage to say to Australians, we want you to be aspirational, we want you to go out, have a red hot crack and get ahead in life and be rewarded financially, but not have the penalty of the Australian tax man sitting over the top of you.
I want to ask you about energy. When you were in government, you were still keen on big renewables projects in the regions. You said you wanted your own electorate to become the renewable energy electorate. Western Downs Shire is screaming at me to become the renewable energy shire of the country with solar and wind, you said, and you talked up big solar projects in the Maranoa. Now you're not so keen. What's changed?
Well, so if you look at what's happened with renewables, those early stages of big renewable projects have been done where existing transmission lines are. So, and even the Grattan Institute's made this very clear. They've said that all the low-hanging fruit was done, and we went in very hard to make sure that we could get that, because obviously once you go beyond that, you're going on to greenfield sites. You're destroying the very thing we're trying to protect, the actual natural environment, and then you're also impacting many of the landholders with the transmission lines. While the landholders that might get the turbines and solar panels, they may get some financial benefit. Those with the transmission lines don't.
So will you cap them now? Will you put a cap on those projects?
Well, what we're going to do is obviously have a mix. To have an all renewables approach puts all your energy eggs in one basket. And when you've got a country with the sovereign ownership of all its resources like Australia, why would you have concentration risk? I mean,
but will you cap them? Because you said a couple of months ago that you want to send the investment signal that there's a cap on where the coalition will go with renewables.
Well, if you put in baseload power and you shift some of that coal-fired into nuclear and you increase gas, and we're all going to have to increase a lot of gas, and that will be our solution to that transition is gas, then you actually do limit the amount of increased renewables put in it. That's just pure mathematics.
Will there be a cap?
Well, the market, as I said, you'll be sending the market signals. That's what governments do, David, is they send the market signals by sending those messages about how we're going to have our energy grid.
And does that signal involve a cap, a limit on how much renewables?
Well, not necessarily a hardline cap, but by us putting in place nuclear plants that the Australian people will own. That's going to, pure mathematics tell you that in fact what's going to happen is you're going to need less renewables, but we're going to need more gas.
You want to tell investors less renewables?
We're going to tell investors that we're going to have an energy mix in this country.
And you want less investment from them in renewables?
Well, we'll be sending the actual mix of what we're looking for and what we want to achieve. And that's about making sure we have reliable, affordable power. But regional Australia's future shouldn't be one determined by billionaires, born billionaires with teal members of parliament that have an ideology telling regional Australia's future is to be littered with transmission lines, solar panels and wind turbines. Regional Australia wants a different different future to that. We want to be part of the energy solution. Renewables is part of that. So too is gas, and so too will be nuclear.
And just related to that, the Future Made in Australia plans of the government to have subsidies and tax breaks to give mining a future in critical minerals processing and so on. Where are the Nats at on this?
So to underpin manufacturing in this country, you've got to have baseload, affordable, reliable power. Renewables can't do that. So there's no industrial country of our scale that has an all renewables approach that this Labor government is doing. So we have to give them confidence that they'll have baseload affordable power, we'll have proper industrial relations policies, and then we will be looking at some of those industries like critical minerals, and obviously we'll be making announcements closer to the election.
What does looking at mean though? Will you back what the government's doing?
Well, not giving billions of dollars to Twiggy Forrest, who's even walked away from it now, for green hydrogen. But
a tax production credit means you get it if you're producing.
Yeah, well, we'll see the details of what we're going to propose well before the election.
Are you open to this idea?
Well, we're looking at all ideas, but making sure that you can't keep subsidising manufacturing industry in this country, because ultimately, at some point, Australian taxpayers' money runs out. So you've got to fix the fundamentals.
So you won't have subsidies?
No, you don't want them to be at the core of it. And whether you look at manufacturing, you look at the energy situation we're at the moment, it's subsidies that is trying to even keep the energy bills down of Australians now. At some point, Australian taxpayers' money runs out. You've got to fix the fundamentals. And that's why we're saying you start with that, and then you look at what can encourage to make sure that we keep that sector going and all sectors going without that subsidisation at some point.
Final one, gambling ads. Would you support a complete ban?
Well, look, we've already moved legislation that the Greens and Labor voted against, which was a ban an hour before and an hour after sporting events on TV. It is a complex area beyond TV, and I think we've got to sit down and we're prepared to work with the government online, as well as what happens at.
I mean, you've seen what's been reported where they're going on this: 2 ads an hour before, an hour after, no ads.
Yeah, and I'm prepared to sit down with them. I've been very clear with this. I find it offensive. I think this has actually been one issue that's been made by the gambling companies themselves. If they'd taken a deep breath on their advertising and shoving odds and multi-odds down my kids' throat, I find it offensive. I've got to sit there before football and have someone tell me about a multi I could take. I just want to sit there and watch it with my kids, and I'll introduce them to gambling. I'm not a wowser, I enjoy a flutter, but I'll introduce gambling to my kids when I'm ready, not because I want to watch football. We've got to also look after free-to-air TV. They're under threat, and we need to make sure we get the balance right. So I think there is an opportunity for a bipartisan approach here to get this right, but the community is clearly telling us we've got to do something, and we've got to do something soon.
All right, Nationals leader David Littleproud, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.